Thank you all for coming out today. I'm going to talk about common sense cybersecurity, then I'm going to talk about the law, first the American law, then the EU, and then I'll finish up with comments about German law. Cybersecurity is becoming a matter of life and death. Modern cars are networked computers on the road with the potential to reduce accidents. This year, worldwide, auto sales will top 80 million, and 1/3 of those new cars will be connected to the internet. However, malware attacks on autos have yet to result in any reported deaths, but predictions for such tragedies are well founded. Computers guide hospital staff to properly dispense drugs and to track vital signs. Ransomware attacks on hospitals are increasingly putting patients' lives at risk. We need to understand new and evolving cyber risks. Cybersecurity legal requirements are replacing ineffective voluntary approaches. The new laws deserve your sustained attention. Driven by the coming changes, the timing is right to create new businesses in the training and awareness categories. My main theme is that cybersecurity effective requires hard culture. To make cybersecurity effective requires hard cultural change, including updated cybersecurity education and awareness models. Today, 12-year-olds have smartphones. We need to begin cybersecurity and cyber hygiene lessons in middle schools. Teaching effective cybersecurity means creating age-appropriate curriculums up to and including college. History and technological change outpace law and culture. Repeatedly, inventions and technologies have outpaced the law. Facebook was founded in 2006, 1 year before the first Apple smartphone. In Germany, in 2007, the BSI, that's the Federal Office for Information Security, published a booklet in English, which this slide mentions. And as you can see, of the 50 most important essential cybersecurity safeguards, training came in at number 32. This booklet is still available as a free download and remains a great resource. Bitcoin was founded or invented in 2009. By 2017, low estimates are that there will be over 2 billion smartphones in use, plus billions of other connected devices. And you can do the math. If 0.25% are infected, that's many, many devices. With so many smartphones and other devices in our hands, the risks are growing. And our dependence on IT and software is growing faster than our ability to control it. Fear-driven solutions are not the answer. Too often in the past, we've been forced to waste resources on costly security theater. On the other hand, we are better off in April 2016 because Facebook's WhatsApp conversations are covered by end-to-end encryption. Although technology developments and news may outpace human understanding, common sense, simplicity, and basic understanding do catch up, especially when everyone grows up surrounded by proven behaviors. I dare say our parents did not teach cybersecurity, but my children are growing up cyber savvy about social engineering and other risks. Cybersecurity knowledge is part of their everyday common sense home education. What is missing is formal education. However, today the elemental basic practices have neither been codified in law nor become common sense adopted by everyone. Efforts to contain hidden electronic malware is somewhat similar to the 19th century history of hand washing, which took decades to be fully adopted by the medical profession, even longer to become everyday practice. And here are the key points: part of everyone's basic education and required by law. Restaurant employees must wash their hands. Another historical analogy worth mentioning are the great fires in history. London in 1666, and in October 1871 was the deadliest fire in US history, which occurred in Peshtigo, around Peshtigo, Wisconsin. You all probably know about the Great Chicago Fire, which happened the same day. Because of the drought, Peshtigo was a forest fire in Wisconsin, which resulted in a firestorm that burned 1.25 million acres, or 4,800 square kilometers, an area twice the size of Rhode Island, and caused 1,500 deaths. The Chicago fire left 100,000 homeless and 300 people dead. Today, fire regulations and legislation are enforced everywhere for good reasons. A similar process of evolution, differing in complex ways, is happening in the cybersecurity field. Firewalls are named aptly, and the insurance industry and laws will speed up this process in the coming years. But in the meantime, cybersecurity problems are growing worse. According to the Financial Times cybersecurity special report published on the 16th of March, 2016, the FBI estimated that in the past 2 years, $2 billion has been stolen by the use of fake emails from 12,000 corporate victims worldwide. The average time lag to discovery was 7 months because security flaws that do not affect performance remain invisible. Today we're all targets, just one click away from crooks who, among many nightmares, would steal your data, your identities, your trade secrets, and raid your bank accounts. And they are on the dark web. But many breaches that have occurred are warnings of worse to come. This is the dark web, by the way. We have seen breaches at Anthem, eBay, Home Depot, Target, Primera Blue Cross, JP Morgan, Sony, which of course was an attack by the North Koreans, and the US Office of Personnel Management. These are the London, Peshtigo, and Chicago fire warnings. What will it take for cybersecurity to become a top priority? And how did the bad guys do it? On the encrypted dark web, there are bulletproof networks for online criminals and despots which offer for sale digital burglar exploit kits designed to commit fraud. Rogue states, especially Russia and China, tolerate outlaw servers and the ongoing development of crimeware. And data or breach costs and damages are growing. And this is perhaps one of the most important slides because the expense of data security can no longer be discounted. It may be true that in the last century that the less spent on computer security, the higher one's profit. But it is certainly a miscalculation of risk today. Whether it is a breach which triggers legal reporting requirements or an incident which requires internal investigation, cybersecurity costs vary by the size of the potential breach, the number of records, and the type of information. All breaches may include the following costs, and from audits and internal investigations to notices to customers, these are costs and damages which can add up to millions of dollars. Further, the cybersecurity as an added IT extra expense fails because of the high risk of cyber crimes damages to share prices, reputations, and brands. The IBM company has created a calculator, and you can go to this site, IBMcostofdatabreach.com, and enter in information about your own company and calculate what a breach might cost. Cybersecurity is better seen as a core component of business because the economic benefits of good cybersecurity can be measured against the costs and damages of actual cyber breaches. Large corporations with IT departments are actively working towards adopting state-of-the-art cybersecurity. Today, the best that money can buy creates a cyber-resilient organization which can prevent, detect, contain, and recover from attacks while minimizing non-compliance with the law and protecting intellectual property, among other things. Security services for sale include having 24/7 real-time monitoring of your network and its users. Consultants can craft and help you implement well-designed cybersecurity incident response plans. Just check out what the leading cybersecurity companies offer for sale. Depending on what's at risk, the costs of such protections may be worth the expenses. Risks ought to be managed in an ongoing security process. Someone has to watch for known vulnerabilities and fix the flaws as soon as possible. The best organizations have created a security-driven culture with multiple layers of security, which include separate security training and awareness programs. And with experience and practice, security becomes second nature and a part of a company's culture. In any event, to be as effective as organizations which wisely outsource cybersecurity to experts in advanced IT departments is not affordable for most people and organizations. In fact, the sole focus on software and advanced monitoring platforms will never be enough to maintain true cyber resiliency. Effective employee training and awareness is a reasonable, necessary, and affordable goal. This is a very interesting insight from the BSI magazine, it's the German security magazine, Security in Focus, by the president of the Federal Office of Information Security. Even if it is impossible to achieve 100% cybersecurity protection, 80 to 90% can be achieved with 20% effort. The 20% effort results in 80% cybersecurity protection rule should not be seen as a static rule. To be useful, this rule must be applied as part of an ongoing security process in the context of the following questions. What are the best, most cost-effective, and practical 20% efforts? Answers to these fundamental questions, that fundamental question will require updated cybersecurity training and awareness. In my opinion, an essential part of the focus ought to be required and age-appropriate testing for competence. Like learner's permits and driver's licenses, effective programs will ensure by law that the minimum and basic level of security skills are understood. Let me quickly add that this has to be combined with tailored cybersecurity software protections. We have to rely on multiple layers of security. And one major caution is that the 2080 rule model is totally inadequate to remedy past problems such as pervasive bugs in open source code and SQL injections. And speaking of such, there was solutions to the problems may require actions such as patching for known flaws. Patching for known flaws which are subject to automated attack. And new laws are necessary to address this problem. In fact, in 2014, there was a law proposed in the United States Congress, H.R. 5793, the Cyber Supply Chain Management and Transparency Act of 2014, which would have required, among other things, that contractors doing business with the U.S. federal government verify that products do not contain known security vulnerabilities. Sounds reasonable, but it didn't pass. Why isn't this being done already? Do you require this from your business partners? Why not? And for further information, the two organizations at the bottom are trying to promote accountability, and they're definitely worth visiting. So, while tailoring your cybersecurity plans to your business, here's an insight from January of 2016 from two leading members of the cybersecurity area on flipping the economics of cyber attacks. They studied cyber attacks and the crooks that do them, and they found that most attackers are looking for the quick and easy mark, and by simply delaying a breach by 40 hours, 60% of attackers will move on to an easier target. As we will see, network defenders in highly regulated industries are by law required to create tailored defenses which actually prevent attacks. These are the critical buzzwords, and not only in cybersecurity but in many other areas, and prevention, detection, and response. If you believe you're subject to a targeted attack, an advanced attack, be forewarned. If you have valuable intellectual property, you will be attacked. Then my common sense advice is to consult experts. But for most people and businesses, the practical basics, which are the most cost-effective steps for cybersecurity, should be on equal goal, on par with complying with laws and regulations. Compliance and audit security alone, so-called buzzword compliance, is plainly insufficient. So that is the big picture common sense, and now I'm going to turn to some interesting topics still in the common sense category. First, cyber sabotage, espionage, and spying. Advanced persistent attacks are targeted cyber attacks by highly resourceful criminals, non-state groups, or foreign governments. And such attacks have been employed for destructive purposes, cyber espionage, and spying against human rights activists, journalists, states, companies with intellectual property, trade secrets, customer lists, and plans. Again, if your company has valuable secret information, my advice is to plan for the worst. You have to have expert defenses. Sony was attacked by North Korea. Such is the power of APTs that catastrophic damages to critical infrastructure are possible. Such attacks have been made against Israel, Iran, Estonia, and in December 2015, the Ukraine power grid. Currently, the US military cyber corps is targeting ISIS. The key point is the cyber arms race is happening. Cyber war is a part now of any potential wider war, and it's a new and permanent danger. Next, insider threats. I hope you've all seen this story. It's quite amazing. On March 11th, 2016, the Financial Times reported that cyber criminals siphoned 101 million, of which 81 million has not been recovered, in one of the most audacious bank heists in history. They succeeded in assuming the false identity of the Bangladesh Central Bank and using properly credentialed SWIFT system transfer orders to the New York Fed got these transfers. There's been a lot of talk about what the problem was. They didn't have a firewall, is one explanation. They left their servers on 24/7 without monitoring. So far, no corrupt insider has been identified, but insider threats include gross negligence, and there's no question there was gross negligence by the management of this bank. Insider threats can serve the public interest. Recall Edward Snowden was an insider. And even if you favor what he did, which I do, the issue of insider threats is real for all organizations. So there are many steps you can take to significantly reduce insider risks, subject to local law. To name just a few, conduct pre-employment background checks, post-hire risk alerts. If somebody's being arrested continuously while they're on vacation, might be something you're interested in. Safeguard electronic data and access control lists. Even if you trust your employees fully, problems do arise. Then there's the bring your own device area, perhaps symbolized by Hillary Clinton involving her misuse of private email accounts while serving as Secretary of State. Actually heard something quite interesting and ironic. Given the surveillance that the Chinese do on US State Department, it might be that she was actually more secure by using a private server. In any event, whether it's your smartphone, your laptop, or some other private device, the spread of BYOD raises important issues crossing several substantive areas. And here are several to consider. First, there's a risk of loss of data. Employees should be required to agree in advance to those policies which will protect your confidential business and customer information. So-called MDM software, mobile device management software, will allow a lost smartphone to be locked down and even wiped clean. You are well advised to have a dual-use device user agreement wherein the consent of an employee for MDM software is clear, as well as other company policies relating to BYOD are made explicit. For example, when an employee leaves your business, there ought to be exit procedures that ensure that all protected information is removed. More generally, employees need a code of conduct. which includes cyber awareness, so that your business culture promotes cyber resilience, cybersecurity, and cyber hygiene. Include everybody, because the human factor is paramount. You are only as strong as your weakest link. Social engineering is the fancy term for a con game used in the cybersecurity context. Social engineering bypasses and thereby defeats every technical safeguard. The fact that human vulnerabilities remain the weakest link in any security system predates computers. Loose lips sink ships ought to be updated to loose clicks cause chaos. Criminals will set up false identities on social media networks to gather personal information about targets. Knowing when you are on vacation can be very useful. In contrast to finding technological solutions, social engineering risks are effectively reduced by awareness training to sensitize people about such methods. For example, the successful cyber attack known as the business email compromise crime involves wire transfers and always involves urgency and the appearance of the inability to contact supervisors ordering the transfers. The FBI reported in 2015 that it has tracked more than 7,000 companies which, since 2013, have lost more than $740 million by this fraud. Wire transfers by email authorization should be handled with skeptical scrutiny. Indeed, rules against using USB sticks have to include social engineering aspects. The appearance of an unexpected confidential bonus list USB stick left in the corporate lunchroom is most likely a modern Trojan horse. Malware spam using social engineering tricks evolves, and so too must your healthy mistrust. Awareness and training, including the social engineering topic, deserves your sustained attention, and new businesses have yet to fill these needs effectively. Here are a couple of businesses, actually, that have tried to do this, and they're not available in German, in the German language. So let me turn next to law firms. At some point, we all need the advice of a lawyer. It's worth keeping in mind that the collection, storage, and disposition of your confidential electronic information is a topic that should be disclosed to you, so that you understand that your lawyer has good cybersecurity to keep your information confidential. By 2013, hundreds of US law firms had been the target of attacks, including 80 of the 100 largest law firms were successfully attacked, and the average cost of a breach at those law firms was $1 million. On the other hand, the exposure of global corruption, aided and abetted by the Mossack Fonseca law firm, was in the public good. And perhaps you've seen now the Panama Papers, and this is a positive breach in some respects. So, ransomware, common sense, culture, the laws, they all lag. Consider the growing dangers of ransomware crime, where somebody encrypts your files and demands a payoff, often in Bitcoin. There's no breach, they haven't stolen the data, it's just an interruption of service, which can be solved without a material delay. But failing to report such incidents means that criminals are free to strike again and again. If you are attacked, it is in everyone's interest to share threat intelligence. The best one-stop source for a summary of past attacks is Verizon's annual data breach investigations report. And hot off the press, tomorrow this slide becomes dated, because tomorrow will be the 2016 report from Verizon. It's out today, then it's out this afternoon, because I checked before I came here. Cyber threats are constantly evolving and probing for victims. To stay informed and on guard against old and new criminal trends, such as ransomware and fake websites, you're well advised to follow security blogs and sign up for email alerts. There was a report from the SANS in 2016 on awareness programs. And as we've discussed, awareness programs are a critical component of all security programs, but they're still a low priority, underfunded, and when implemented, taught by staff lacking communication skills. This, as I've said, is a business opportunity because most of these programs are still primitive and undeveloped. So, what are the key common sense takeaways? And let's play a mind game for a moment. Is your car parked in a garage and locked with a steering wheel lock? Or is it on the street locked? Or is it unlocked? Or is it in your driveway with the key in the ignition unlocked? The easy target gets robbed. The low-hanging fruit gets picked first. The bear catches the slowest prey. And the criminal hacker succeeds when you are less secure than your competitors. So what should you do tomorrow? Periodic cyber audits will confirm whether your business has been lacking and needs drastic improvement to meet evolving laws and technological threats. Consider using outside counsel so that your cyber audit findings remain privileged. You are only as strong as your weakest link, so better to find it and fix it. And check again and again, for security is a process, not a static state. So just like the slide shows, do you deploy a strong cybersecurity software infrastructure? Have you identified your critical assets and who really needs access? Do you share attack intelligence within your business from the top to the bottom and to appropriate authorities? And do you patch and update timely? If you do, you will be safer. So let me turn to the law now. There's no one regulatory source for the law for the US and the EU. One has to look to several sources for guidance, from particular laws for each nation, specific industries, federal laws, state laws, regulatory agencies, lawsuits, resulting settlements, and judicial decisions. Here are two key questions to consider. The first, what is legally required security? Obviously, complying with applicable laws and regulations is the answer. But the crucial question is, what is adequate security at a reasonable cost? And this depends on the risks and the costs. And though answers can be found under the current regulatory agencies and laws that we're about to discuss, the answers to the first question differ from the answers to the second question, but both are required. Put another way, when companies fail to do basic security and suffer an incident or a breach, the company will have no defense to civil and possibly criminal penalties. Large-scale data breaches in the USA will result in government investigations by the Department of Justice, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the regulatory agencies, including the Federal Trade Commission, the SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission, and the Federal Communications Commission, depending on jurisdiction, and states. Companies will be exposed to civil penalties, injunctive relief, and loss of reputation. Too few recall the lessons of the Great Fires. By far, it is cheaper to do a pound of prevention than suffer a ton of pain. Data security covers data stored at a company and in transit. And data stored in the cloud changes everything. Before you put your business in the cloud, please understand key contract terms regarding access, portability, and whether the cloud third parties have proper cybersecurity. There are several laws, US laws, which require companies to have data security protections in place or prohibit the misuse of such information. I'm not going to read all these out loud, except to say it depends on which area you're practicing, and then these laws become relevant. If you have a data breach, many of these statutes become the subject of a class action lawsuit involving technical legal issues of standing. And how do you define harm? Is it actual or merely a violation of statutory provisions? In the United States, class action lawsuits will continue for any company doing business which suffers a large data breach. If you have an interest in this topic, this publication from January 2016 is worth reading. It's a good place to begin. 47 US states have data breach notification laws, which require companies to inform customers if their data is breached. Eventually, Congress will pass a national data breach notification law. Other laws protect the privacy of educational records and even video store rentals. In 2015, California, which continues to set trends for privacy legislation, passed a law which says that consumers have to be notified if their smart devices have voice recognition features, and it prohibits them from making any recordings for advertising purposes. My purpose is not to go into narrow details about the particular laws, except to alert you to these broad themes. I brought along Data and Goliath, which is another great book which covers this area in great and deeper detail. So next I'm going to turn to the Securities and Exchange Commission. This is the agency which registers public companies and regulates them. In September 2015, the SEC, in its national exam program, Risk Alert, released a cybersecurity examination initiative which announced its priority in conducting exams of registered companies will focus on 6 areas. And these areas form the basis for discipline if you violate the rules. You have to have security tailored to your business. You have to include password protocols. You have to have data loss prevention, including patch management and system configuration. You have to use due diligence in selecting your vendors. You've got to do training, and it has to be tailored to include procedures and all personnel. And you have to have an incident response plan with assigned roles. So 1 week after releasing this, the SEC had a settlement in RT Jones. This was an investment advisor which had personal data for 100,000 clients stolen. The breach occurred at its third-party hosted web server. The intruder was not identified because the log files were erased. The firm had to notify its customers and offer identity theft protection. No financial harm was resulted, but Jones was disciplined because it failed to have written policies and procedures reasonably designed to safeguard its clients' personal information, including conducting periodic risk assessments and audits, employing firewalls to protect its web servers or to see that the third party did so, encrypting client data on those servers, and establishing procedures for responding to a cybersecurity incident. This is a reasonable standard set out by the SEC designed to instruct the market. Notice that number 1 calls for periodic risk assessments, underscoring that security is a process, not a product. So in 2011, October, the SEC required that cybersecurity insurance be a topic for disclosure in company reports. Public companies have to address risk for both itself and third-party contractors, and it should be on your short list of essential topics. Insuring against cyber attacks is a proven way to manage risk. For a detailed look at this issue and other large business challenges, I suggest seeing this report by Caxton from October 2015. Next, I'll turn to the Federal Trade Commission. I know this goes on, but that's the way it is with the law. It's under different jurisdictions. The Federal Trade Commission is one of the most active agencies in creating cybersecurity doctrines and using its jurisdiction to prevent unfair or deceptive trade practices. In June 30th, 2015, they publicized Start with Security guidance, and this lays out 5 principles. You have to know what information you have and who has access. Keep only information needed to conduct your business. That's a lesson Sony could have used to avoid a lot of problems. Protect information in your control and dispose properly of unneeded information, and again, prepare a plan to respond to security incidents. So the FTC in some 50 consent decrees has disciplined companies for following transgressions, failing to identify their risks and to detect intrusions, inadequate password controls, inadequate firewalls, inadequate encryption of sensitive data, inadequate oversight of vendors and partners, failures to correct known deficiencies after discovery. That's truly incredible. And failure to alert affected customers in a timely way. From these consent orders emerges a robust set of parameters for cybersecurity. Next is the Federal Communications Commission. And in a case that was reported March 7th, 2016, the FCC fined Verizon Wireless for using tracking cookies without consent. This actually happened a couple of years earlier, and since 2015, 2015 March, Verizon makes full disclosure of its use of super cookies. Customers are not tracked unless they opt in. Verizon has to obtain consent before sharing information with third parties. And Verizon had to appoint a compliance officer and submit regular yearly compliance reports for 3 years. Verizon, by the way, owns the AOL service. And it's an important case because it sets a benchmark that businesses use customer data at their own peril if they fail to make disclosure of their policies, obtain customer consent, and ensure that third parties respect those policies. So a couple more laws from the US worth mentioning before I turn to the EU and Germany. The Cybersecurity Enhancement Act of 2014 was passed, signed into law in December 2014, and the NIST is supposed to create international standards of cybersecurity. That's the National Institute of Standard and Technology. The Cybersecurity Information Sharing Act was signed into law in December 2015 and charges the Department of Homeland Security to create a portal where companies can voluntarily alert one another to dangerous hacking activity. Good luck with that. So let me turn to the European Union and the right to be forgotten and other updates. In May 2014, the European Court of Justice issued an opinion requiring internet companies such as Google to permit customers to opt to be forgotten. In October 2015, the European Court of Justice invalidated the EU-US Safe Harbor Framework, which had been in existence since the year 2000, for the transatlantic transfer of data. The US Department of Commerce, however, continues to administer the Safe Harbor program until a replacement is passed. US companies before and still have to self-certify that they comply with data protection rules. There are major differences between the EU and the US concerning how data is handled, and probably in some respects they are fundamental and can't be overcome. As you've seen, the US has different laws applying to different sectors. In the EU, data protection is a fundamental right. In the US, the First Amendment protects almost all expression, and you don't have the right to be forgotten in the US. Notice varies by industry and law and separate laws. There's no single law which requires disclosure on data. In the EU, they're working towards one single law. Let me turn to children for a moment, because again, there are different laws here. The US has one law, the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, requires parental permission for collecting data from children under age 13. In the EU, right now, it's by state, and you need parental consent to collect data from anyone under the age of 16, and the states have the right to lower it to 13. There will be continued conflict between the EU and the US. The EU Cybersecurity Directive refers to the ongoing process to approve the informal agreements reached in December 2015, the so-called Privacy Shield. I'm sorry, these names are quite ordinary, but they're the accurate ones. The Article 29 Working Party criticized the Privacy Shield agreements for failing to limit, quote, massive and indiscriminate collection of data by US authorities. And this has created legal uncertainty, that whatever is passed will be challenged successfully in court. So the Privacy Shield is the replacement proposal for the safe harbor, and there are 7 principles to give notice of the disclosure of data processing key elements. A choice, persons can opt out. Security, reasonable and appropriate security for personal data, PD. You can only use the data as intended, and there has to be accountability for the onward transfer. Privacy protection shall apply, and there has to be recourse, enforcement, and liability. These are extensions of the EU's Data Protection Act of 1995 and the 1998 Directive on Data Protection. Customer consent is required for disclosure of data, and it cannot be deemed granted. If companies fail to comply, court remedies, including fines, may be imposed. It's expected to become fully effective in 2018, at which time companies larger than 250 employees with over a minimum of 5,000 customer records will be required to have an official data protection officer. The goal is to apply a uniform standard of regulation and protection of data across the EU. US companies doing business in the EU will have to comply with the EU Privacy Shield principles. What can you do now to be prepared? Privacy policies, procedures, and documents have to be kept up to date. They may be inspected at any time after the effective date. Appoint a data protection officer and craft oversight of all privacy activities. Compliance reports will be required in an annual report. There will be a 24-hour breach notification process. Prepare to fulfill the rights to be forgotten to erasure and data portability. Conduct your business with privacy by design rather than as an extra cost. The bottom line, pay attention to the implementation process. Lots is going to change. And if you adhere to the most stringent privacy policies, you will probably be okay. For further resources, there's an organization called the International Association of Privacy Professionals, the IAPP, and there's lots of information there. So in March 2015, the English Court of Appeal in Google versus Google found that plaintiffs could sue for damages based on distress. And why is that interesting? For misuse of private information, because they wouldn't have to actually prove monetary loss. And that there hasn't been a damage assigned in that case yet, but it greatly increases the scope of compensation claims. What a relief. We're now turning to Germany. The source for German cybersecurity issues is the BSI portal, and there are comprehensive reports in English available on that site, which are very interesting and comprehensive. In July 2015, Germany has enforced a new IT Security Act, which applies to critical infrastructure and online shops. And later in 2016, there will be an implementing directive which will detail the full scope and operation of the new act. Once that directive enters into force, critical infrastructure industries will be required to implement sector-specific state-of-the-art IT security within 2 years. They will have to prove that they comply with security requirements at least once every 2 years through audits, certifications, and exams. They will have to designate a liaison to the BSI within 6 months from the entry into force of the implementing directive. And they will have to notify the BSI immediately if their IT systems are disrupted or compromised. And violations of the act can result in administrative fines up to 100,000 euro. It's a very good law. Another German law to consider makes explicit that there's a legal duty to update security software when you operate a commercial website. The BSI magazine Security in Focus mentioned this. The German Telemedia Act obligates website operators and hosting providers offering telemedia services on a commercial basis to improve the protection of their IT facilities by employing state-of-the-art technical measures to stop attacks on their systems and on personal data. A website may be deemed to be commercial if revenue is generated through advertising. This would seem to encompass just about all websites. And one solution for complying with this, of course, is to outsource security to a qualified provider. So here's an interesting point from the BSI. They've observed that one of the most common security errors is the failure to apply updates and security patches. Indeed, experts estimate that over 90% of all internet attacks could be prevented if everyone would use the most current software versions. So I'm coming to the conclusion. Solutions to the lack of general authorities and common laws poses fundamental challenges today, and history can serve as a guide how these solutions have evolved in the past when inventions and new technology required new regulation. Bruce Schneier addressed this in his 2016 speech to the RSA conference entitled Securing Large-Scale Socio-Technical Systems. He called for a new regulatory agency to be created in the US to cover the gamut of computer and internet security issues. Indeed, in the US and the EU, what is lacking is a holistic approach which takes into account the full scope of the cyber age issues. Richard Clarke, who's the author of the Cyber War book, in his 2015 RSA conference keynote address, Cyber Wars in the Middle East, What Corporations and Governments Need to Do About It, called upon nations to make cyber defense a priority and for nations to pass laws which require operators of critical infrastructure, especially electrical power grids, to report on cyber defenses. At least Germany is moving in the right direction. So here's a reference to a book that is quite interesting. A copy is up here if you wish to see it. And here's a reference to Schneier on security. He's really, truly an expert. I have a couple of handouts on a training model and a lot of what I tried to summarize. So let me end with embrace change, be flexible, and be safe. Thank you very much.